While everyone's eyes are glued to the usual suspects, four nations you've barely thought about are quietly stacking the deck for World War III. And here's the crazy part. They're not building massive armies or testing nukes in the Pacific. They're doing something way more genius, way more subtle, and honestly, way more terrifying. These countries have figured out that the next global conflict won't be won by whoever has the most tanks or the biggest navy. It'll be won by whoever controls the choke points, the resources, and the infrastructure that modern warfare literally cannot function without. And right now, while the superpowers are flexing their muscles and making threats, these four silent players are positioning themselves to hold all the cards when everything goes sideways. So who are we talking about? Turkey, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, and Brazil. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Those aren't exactly the countries that come to mind when you picture World War III. But that's precisely why their strategy is so brilliant. While China and the US are locked in their Pacific standoff, while Russia deals with NATO on its borders, these four nations are quietly becoming absolutely indispensable. And when the shooting actually starts, they'll be the ones everyone needs to either court as allies or neutralize as threats. Let's start with Turkey, because honestly, their position is low-key insane. Look at a map. Turkey sits right there at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. They control the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits, which means they literally control whether Russia's Black Sea Fleet can even access the Mediterranean. During World War III, that's not just strategically important, that's everything. Russia's entire southern naval strategy depends on those straits. Without access, their Black Sea Fleet is basically trapped in a bathtub. Turkey knows this. Russia knows this. And Turkey's been playing both sides like a fiddle for years now. Here's where it gets wild. Turkey is technically a NATO member, right? But they've also been buying Russian S-400 missile systems, cozying up to Moscow when it suits them, and basically telling the West to back off whenever they try to pressure Erdogan. In a World War III scenario, Turkey becomes the ultimate swing state. Do they honor their NATO obligations and block Russian naval access, essentially crippling Russia's Mediterranean operations? Or do they stay neutral, maybe even tilt toward whoever offers them the best deal? Because real talk, Turkey's economy has been struggling, and nothing motivates geopolitical decisions quite like economic survival. But Turkey's leverage goes way beyond those straits. They've got the second largest military in NATO with over 400,000 active troops. They've been battle-hardening their forces in Syria, Libya, and Azerbaijan. They're manufacturing their own drones, the Bayraktar TB2s, which have already proven devastatingly effective in modern warfare. And they're positioned perfectly to control energy corridors from the Caspian Sea and the Middle East into Europe. When World War III breaks out and Europe is desperate for energy because Russian supplies are cut off, guess who's sitting pretty on those alternative pipeline routes? Turkey literally becomes the gatekeeper. They can demand almost anything in exchange for keeping those energy supplies flowing, for allowing military access, for staying in NATO or threatening to leave it. Now imagine this scenario. It's 6 months into World War III. NATO forces need to move troops and equipment through Turkey to support operations in the Caucasus or the Middle East. Russia needs those straits open to support their operations in Syria and project power into the Mediterranean. China needs Turkey to stay neutral so their Belt and Road infrastructure isn't disrupted. Suddenly, Ankara is getting phone calls from every major capital on Earth. Every one of those calls is essentially a negotiation for Turkey's cooperation. And Turkey can play hardball because everyone needs them. They can extract security guarantees, economic aid, territorial concessions, you name it. The country that was struggling economically before the war suddenly becomes one of the wealthiest nations in the conflict zone. Now let's talk about Indonesia, because their positioning is straight-up genius in a completely different way. Indonesia is the world's fourth most populous country with over 275 million people. They've got the largest economy in Southeast Asia. But here's what makes them absolutely critical in World War III. They control the sea lanes between the Pacific and Indian Oceans. The Strait of Malacca, the Sunda Strait, the Lombok Strait. These are the maritime highways that global trade depends on. In peacetime, roughly 40% of world trade passes through these choke points. In wartime, they become the most contested waters on the planet. Think about it. China's entire energy security depends on oil tankers from the Middle East passing through these Indonesian straits. Japan, South Korea, they're in the same boat. If Indonesia decides to close these straits or even just heavily regulate passage, China's war machine starts running on fumes within months. The Chinese know this vulnerability keeps their strategists up at night. That's why China's been investing billions into the Belt and Road Initiative, trying to create alternative routes through Central Asia. But those land routes can't replace the sheer volume of maritime shipping. Here's where Indonesia's strategy gets really interesting. They've been playing it cool, refusing to take sides, building relationships with everyone. They're part of ASEAN, which has a policy of neutrality. They've got economic ties with China, security partnerships with the US and Australia, and they're geographically positioned so that nobody can really force their hand without triggering a massive regional crisis. In World War III, Indonesia becomes the Switzerland of Southeast Asia, except way more important because they control the shipping lanes everyone needs. But Indonesia isn't just sitting back and hoping their neutrality holds. They've been massively upgrading their military. They're buying F-15s from the US, Rafales from France, and building up their navy specifically to patrol those straits. They're making it clear that any power wanting to use Indonesian waters is going to have to ask nicely and probably pay for the privilege. And in a World War III scenario where supply lines mean everything, countries will pay. They'll pay in weapons, in economic aid, in diplomatic recognition. Indonesia can basically write its own checks. And here's the kicker. Indonesia has the world's largest Muslim population. That gives them enormous soft power across the Middle East and Central Asia. In a global conflict, that religious and cultural influence could be leveraged to broker deals, form alliances, or stay neutral in ways that benefit them. They're not just controlling sea lanes, they're positioned to influence the entire Islamic world's stance on the conflict. Kazakhstan is the dark horse that nobody sees coming. This is the world's largest landlocked country, sitting right there between Russia and China. And they're playing the most dangerous game imaginable. Kazakhstan has something both superpowers desperately need: uranium. They produce over 40% of the world's uranium supply. In a prolonged World War III scenario, nuclear power becomes critical because traditional energy infrastructure gets targeted. Countries need uranium for their nuclear plants, for their nuclear weapons programs, for maintaining their strategic deterrent. Kazakhstan is sitting on the motherlode. But it gets crazier. Kazakhstan also has massive oil and natural gas reserves. They're part of Russia's backyard, but they've been very carefully distancing themselves from Moscow ever since Ukraine went down. They've been making deals with China, with Turkey, with Western companies. They're building pipelines that bypass Russia entirely. In World War III, Kazakhstan becomes the energy prize that everyone wants, but nobody can fully control. Here's the scenario that should terrify everyone. Russia and China are both desperate for Kazakhstan's resources. Russia views Kazakhstan as part of its sphere of influence and cannot afford to lose it. China needs those resources for its industrial base and can't let Russia monopolize them. Kazakhstan is playing them against each other brilliantly. They're taking Chinese investment while maintaining security ties with Russia, all while reaching out to the West for additional partnerships. When the war starts, Kazakhstan can basically auction off its resources to the highest bidder, or better yet, maintain neutrality and sell to everyone at marked up wartime prices. The geography is crucial too. Kazakhstan shares a massive border with Russia and with China. Neither power can risk Kazakhstan becoming a hostile staging ground for the other. This means Kazakhstan has leverage that goes way beyond resources. They can threaten to allow military bases, to permit troop movements, to open or close transportation corridors. Both Russia and China have to keep Kazakhstan happy, which means Kazakhstan can extract concessions that would make any other country jealous. And Kazakhstan's leadership knows exactly what they're doing. They've been diversifying their economy, building relationships across multiple continents, and creating dependencies that work in their favor. In World War III, while battles rage across Europe and Asia, Kazakhstan becomes the quiet power broker, making deals that reshape the entire Central Asian region. Brazil rounds out our four silent powers, and their role is different but equally critical. Brazil is the dominant power in South America, and in World War III, South America becomes the world's breadbasket and resource reserve. While other continents are getting bombed and blockaded, South America remains relatively untouched. Brazil controls the Amazon rainforest, which is not just an environmental resource, but a strategic one. They've got massive agricultural capacity, rare earth minerals, oil reserves, and they're far enough from the main theaters of war that their infrastructure stays intact. Here's why that matters. In a prolonged global conflict, food becomes a weapon. Countries that can't feed their populations can't sustain a war effort. Brazil becomes the supplier everyone needs. They've got soybeans, corn, beef, sugar, you name it. China's been buying Brazilian agriculture for years, but so has Europe, so has the Middle East. In wartime, those exports become leverage. Brazil can demand political concessions, military equipment, technology transfers, whatever they want, because countries that are starving don't have many negotiating options. But Brazil's not just about food, they've got one of the most capable militaries in South America. They've got a domestic defense industry that produces everything from armored vehicles to fighter jets. And they've been developing their own cyber warfare capabilities. In World War III, Brazil becomes the fortress that every side wants as an ally, but can't easily threaten. The US can't afford to have Brazil tilt toward China. China can't afford to lose Brazilian resources. Europe needs Brazilian supplies. Everyone has to keep Brazil happy. And here's the thing that makes Brazil's position so powerful. They don't have to pick a side. They can maintain neutrality, sell to everyone, and become insanely wealthy while the rest of the world tears itself apart. Or they can pick a side strategically, joining whoever offers them the best post-war settlement. Brazil could emerge from World War III as a genuine superpower, not through military conquest, but through economic dominance and smart diplomacy. The genius of Brazil's position is that geography protects them. They're surrounded by friendly or neutral countries. There's no realistic scenario where major powers can project enough force into South America to threaten Brazil directly. Not when those powers are fighting each other across multiple continents. Brazil becomes the bank, the breadbasket, and the safe haven, all rolled into one. So here's what this all means. When World War III actually kicks off, everyone's going to be watching the battles in the Pacific, the tank columns in Europe, the missile strikes and cyber attacks. But the real story, the one that determines who actually wins, is going to be playing out in these four countries that most people barely think about. Turkey deciding whether to open or close those straits. Indonesia controlling who gets to use the world's most important sea lanes. Kazakhstan auctioning off the resources that modern militaries can't function without. Brazil feeding the world and banking profits while everyone else bleeds. These four countries have figured out something crucial. In modern warfare, you don't have to have the biggest military to have the most power. You just have to control what everyone else needs. And right now, while the traditional powers are preparing for conventional conflict, Turkey, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, and Brazil are positioning themselves to be the kingmakers. They're the ones who will decide which alliances hold and which ones crumble. They're the ones who will profit while others pay the cost of war. The craziest part? This is already happening. These countries are already making the moves, signing the deals, building the relationships that will define their role in a future conflict. They're doing it quietly, without the threatening rhetoric or military buildups that grab headlines. They're playing the long game, and honestly, they're playing it better than anyone else. When the history books get written about World War III, assuming anyone's left to write them, these four silent powers might end up being the real victors. Not because they won battles, but because they never had to fight them in the first place.